Welcome to the Warship Tactics Podcast, episode 66, Back to Basics, Gunnery Skills. I'm your host, Maddminister. In the Warship Tactics Podcast, I discuss tactics and tips to help you improve your World of Warships gameplay. Now let's jump into the action. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky. Basics, Gunnery Skills. I felt I have to go rehash this topic a little bit because as of late, I've seen a lot of suspect gunnery skills. And it's not just in other players, it's been in myself also. And part of the problem is even still talking about when we talk about World of Warships and there not being a tutorial in there, there's not a really good in-game way to truly learn how to aim your main battery guns on the ships that we play. I mean, I'm sure there's people out there now, and I know this for a fact, there's at least one that I talked to in chat in a game not too long ago that didn't understand what the numbers meant on the aiming reticle. Now, if you haven't already set this up, I will suggest that you do this, is that you use the dynamic aiming reticle. Now, how you make it look is up to you, but the dynamic aiming reticle is going to help you a lot, and it's going to make sense of what those numbers are for shell flight times that the game gives us. So what the dynamic reticle does is that no matter what zoom that you are in the game, the tick marks are seconds. So if your shell flight time timer is telling you that your shell flight time is 10 seconds, you got to find the tick mark that represents 10 seconds and line that up on the ship where you want to hit, be it the bow, center mass, or the stern. Now, the dynamic reticle is assuming that a ship is moving at 30 knots. So that's a pretty good number for the higher tiers, and you don't really have to shave some of it off based on slower ships. And you do have to add for faster ships, think Russian destroyers. But it's a nice base number so you know what we're talking about here. So if your shell flight time is 6 seconds, you find the tick mark right after the 5. That's 6 seconds shell flight time. Line that tick mark up on the ship where you want to try to hit it, be it center mass, the bow, or the stern, and you let it fly. I believe that there's people out there that don't really understand that yet, but that's not the only thing that we got to talk about when we're talking gunnery skills, because part of gunnery skills is not only range estimation, speed estimation, angle that the ship is moving to, the angle that the ship is moving in relationship to where you're at, be it the easiest one will be a perpendicular straight line. But most of the time there's some kind of angle toward us, angle away from us, or coming straight to or straight away. But what I believe is the hardest one is an angle moving away. So we have to, it takes practice and time to build those skills. But if you're not sure what you should be doing and what your sight picture looks like, as we call it in the military, Army for me, is that if you don't understand what your sight picture is, you can't fix your sight alignment and sight picture. So the sight picture means you need to have the same look every time you draw down and look down. When we're talking rifle, open sights, iron sights, every time you look through your sights, you want to have the same picture. You want it to look the same, the rear sight to the front sight post. You always want it to be the same. And then you just put that picture onto what you're shooting at. And that is how that's a basics of basic rifle marksmanship. But in the game, we don't have to line up a rear and front sight post. We just have a single point of aim that's represented in the game by our dynamic crosshair, or whatever crosshair that you're using. I suggest a dynamic one. But what we need to do is that you're not always putting the center or the X of that crosshair right on the target, because based off of distance and speed, that's going to change. Some people may call this Kentucky windage. And basically that's feel. In the game, it's really not feel, except for when you take snapshots or the first long range shot at a fast moving target, think a destroyer. Those are feel. But when you're pretty static in a battle, or the movements are pretty, in a predictable manner, it's not Kentucky windage anymore. It's a very good guesstimate, and it is a guesstimate. But there's a lot of things in the game that are built in to try to help us. One is the time to target. based on seconds. The other one is obviously we talked about it, the sight itself, the aiming reticle. And the other one, which is recently introduced into the game, which is on your mini map, you have a circle that is at the end of where the line is showing on the map where your guns are pointed. That circle is indicating about where your shells are going to hit in that little circle if you don't have a target lock. So you can make blind firing and shooting in the smoke a little easier. But you can also use that on ships that you see at the distance to try to adjust your point of aim. And the point of aim is very important. And it takes a little bit of skill at first if you're not always going to look down at the mini map, because I suggest you not stare at your mini map, always looking down. You kind of want to keep your eyes up, but look at the mini map, keep your eyes up, and use all the information that the game is giving us to put rounds on target. Because at the end of the day, the game is about getting rounds on target. The game is about getting the enemy ships sunk and out of the game. Yeah, we could cap it out. You can win by having more points over a certain amount of time. I mean, technically you can win a game and not have any cap points at the time and no ships be destroyed. Maybe you stepped on a cap for 10 seconds and then it was contested the whole time, nothing else was ever taken, and there was like 2 or 3 tick advantage to your team. The time runs out, no ships are dead. Guess what? That's still a win condition. But pretty much it's going to come down to getting the enemy ship sunk as quick as possible. And I talk about it all the time where the destroyers need to get out and win that vision game. That comes into play for spotting targets as early as possible so that those long range ships, think battleships and cruisers, can start putting rounds on target at range 16, 18, 20 plus kilometers in the case of the battleships. But if those players can't hit those targets, then what are we really doing? We're wasting time. And maybe they sit there and they just don't pull the trigger because they're not comfortable hitting targets outside of 16 kilometers. Maybe in their head, because they haven't figured out how to aim and where to place the shots, that they're going to hold fire. Then they get spotted. And then the players who have started to figure out, who have an idea of how the gunnery skills and all those mechanics are put together to land those shots on target, they're going to get the first shots off, the second shots off. They're going to start doing damage first. And what we see a lot when that starts happening is the ships that start receiving fire and either can't return fire, don't see the ship that's shooting at them, or feel that they can't return effective fire. What do? They try to disengage, they turn, and they try to get out of the fight and drop off detection. And the earlier that happens, the worse it is for that team for the most part. Sometimes it works out. But the gunnery skills we have to build. And how do we do that? Well, one way to do it, and this is if you go out and target shoot, whatever it is, be it handguns, rifles, shotguns, bow and arrow, crossbows, throwing knives, or whatever it is, you're trying to take an object and hit another object that you can't literally touch with your hand, and there's a distance in there where you're not holding it, be it thrown by your arm or sent down range by gunpowder or the bow or the string on a bow, whatever it is. The way you get better at that is you do it over and over and over again. But if you're never practicing the proper skills, then you may stumble onto being good. You may just build a sense of that just seems right, but it would be better if we understood what we're trying to see, getting back to sight alignment and sight picture. But it's more complicated than that. Even in World of Warships, it's a little more complicated than that, because we have speed changes. We have how ships are turning. We have angles leading to, coming at, going straight away, coming straight forward. A few times when I was still in the military and active duty in the Army, I had an opportunity to go to a couple of moving target ranges. And before that, I had always thought myself as a better than average shot. I always qualified expert. I never shot 40 out of 40. I've shot 39 a bunch of times out of 40, but I never shot 40 out of 40, but I was always in that expert category, 38 or better. But when I first got to a moving target range, and I think I was probably 20 years old the first time I did this, I don't think I hit a target the first 10 or 12 targets I fired at. I think I was missing them, always behind, and a few of them way out front. And the targets that they had moving at oblique angles away or two, those were even worse. But I think that the first day I was out there, maybe put 100 rounds down range and didn't start hitting targets consistently until probably the last 30 rounds that I was able to put out there. It was just a familiarization. It wasn't in-depth training. But in World of Warships, there's some ships out there that'll put 300-400 rounds out a game. Think Royal Navy, cruisers, American cruisers, especially like Des Moines autoloaders, things like that, Worcester, those types of ships can put out hundreds of rounds a game. And the more feedback you get, the better you're going to be at correcting what you're looking at. But in World of Warships, all the guns, all the main batteries have different ballistic, properties to them. They have different ballistic characteristics. Some have lofty shell angles. Some of them have really flat shell angles. What I mean by high velocity guns, low velocity guns, guns that fall in between. And because we play a bunch of different ships and we're not always taking out, well, most of us are probably not always taking out the exact same ship with the exact same setup. We have to learn how they all function in those parameters of the game. So we have to fall back onto the basics of the gunnery skills built into World of Warships. But like I said, the game gives us most of the information we need to put rounds on target fairly consistently. The problem with it is some of us, and I was like this in the beginning before I really figured out what was going on with how to aim, is we're not sure what the proper thing looks like. So we have trouble with that. So we have a few options here. Either you go into training rooms and you just shoot up bots for hours and hours and hours, which could probably work to a certain degree. Problem with the bots is they tend to come right at you when you activate them and you don't arm them. They just kind of blindly rush you, which doesn't give you those lateral movements, those oblique angles away, those oblique angles towards you. Live players are best for that. You can go into a lot of co-op games that keep cycling through ships and you're still shooting at bots, but they tend to be mixed around a little bit more. But the best practice targets are other real players because they're going to pull things in the game that a bot won't do. So those are the best ways to learn. So how do we know what we should be shooting at? Well, if you start at what should be the easiest targets to hit, which are basically the targets that are moving perpendicular to your position, crossing your T. And if you guys heard me talk in an episode before, in World of Warships, you want to be the leg of the T stabbing it because the ships crossing the T in World of Warships are the ones that are at danger, as opposed to historical, the ships crossing the T were more dangerous to the ships that are single file. But those are the easiest targets to hit because you take your aiming reticle, say we're using the dynamic one, it's a ship that does around 30 knots. Your aiming reticle tells you that it's 12 seconds shell flight time. You find a tick mark that indicates the 12 seconds. You line that tick mark up with just above the water line about where you want those rounds to hit. Just say center mass, especially the farther away something is, or maybe the front third of the ship, and you're probably going to land hits because there's only speed and distance you're taking into account because the aiming reticle and the target lock mechanic in the game is taking care of the rest of it for us. It's actually tracking your guns for you in a certain degree. You don't really notice it, but it actually is. When it becomes hard is when they're moving at angles away from you, towards you, or they're playing with the throttle. And there's keys to understanding when ships are playing with their throttle. One is to look at the smokestacks. You see the smoke angle if it's coming out changing. If it's going at a steep angle going toward the rear of the ship's probably at full speed. If you're watching it and you see that the smoke is starting to go out of the top of the funnels a little higher before it bends backward, you know that the ship is slowing down, changing speeds, and that becomes a guessing game. Another thing is ships that have torpedoes on them can target a ship that's, even if it's out of torpedo range, and use the indicator that says this is where the ship's going to go and see, is it moving forward, is it moving backward, and kind of gauge what speed it is and use that as an indicator of speed. But the game doesn't tell you these things anywhere. There's not a pop-up that pops up and says, hey, when you see the smokestack starting the smoke coming out of the funnel is starting to climb higher before it goes backward, this ship is slowing down, or this ship is moving at less than and full speed. The other thing is we have to have an idea of how fast certain ships are in different tiers, because a tier 10 battleship moves a lot faster than a tier 5 battleship. Japanese tier 5 battleships can do 30 knot, 28 to 30 knots, but American tier 5 battleships, I mean, there's people out there swimming faster than those ships are moving. They're moving like 18 to 20 knots, you know, downhill with the rails greased. And you have to understand that. You have to do a little bit of quick math in your head based on what your time to target is, based on how many ticks. But then you go, wait a minute, my target indicator is geared toward 30 knots. This ship does 30% slower than that. So you gotta guesstimate what the difference is in your head on the fly. After a while, you just get the feel for it. But nothing tells you in the game that that's something that has to happen. Another thing that's hard to understand in the game is where to actually aim at the ships with what kind of guns. I was in a battle on my last stream prior to the recording of this episode, and I was in an Alsace. I had a Musashi coming around the corner of an island, and I was talking on my stream that, okay, Musashi, keep coming. Let me see that soft cheek. Now, most of the times at a slight angle, the Alsace's guns would have trouble penetrating the armor. If I waited for the broadside at a little bit of an angle, probably would have bounced a bunch of shots. But because I had some knowledge of the ship, and people who playing this game for a while know that the Yamato and the Musashi have that soft cheek underneath the number 1 turret, you know that you can get shots in before the thick belt armor is and hit what is a angled piece of Citadel armor if the ship is facing straight at you. But when it comes out at angles, it's flatter, but it's not as thick as the belt armor, and you can punch through it with lower caliber guns. Gave him 2 Citadels and didn't delete them, but killed the ship, sunk the ship because it was already damaged a lot. And had some comments in chat, well, wow, that was a good shot. And I go, no, it's just kind of knowledge of the ship and how some mechanics work. And there's a lot of other instances of that, of just learning some basics about ships in general. But again, the game doesn't tell you that anywhere. So we have to go out and try to find this information, be it YouTube, be it a podcast like this one or others, or just watching gameplay, or maybe even asking in one of the Discord channels that you have for players that play World of Warships, and just ask these questions. And then maybe get somebody to go into a training room with you and shoot at your ship and show you and tell you whether they're shooting at you, and then vice versa. But we have to build those gunnery skills. But then the other thing we need to learn at is, like I was already talking about, is where do we shoot at ships with certain caliber guns? Now, I'm going to use an example here, kind of not an extreme example, but an example only gives you one ammo type, and that's Royal Navy cruisers only have armor piercing, but they have a different flavor of armor piercing ammunition that actually the fuses arm faster. You can get away with shooting armored superstructure with those if you understand the mechanics of the gun and how of that caliber of weapon and how it works in World of Warships. If you understand that the gun arcs and you keep certain ships at certain distances, even if it's a battleship, knowing that you're not going to do nothing to the main battery, you're not going to do nothing to the belt armor, but you know that I have to drop these shells down onto the deck or down into the superstructure, that I need to keep them at certain ranges because I know how the gun performance is in those ships. Those are things you need to know. But the other thing you need to figure out too is, where do I aim at ships? Something that I do is, when ships aren't that fairly coming at me, even slight angles, and I'm in cruisers that have low caliber guns, I tend to put my aiming reticle right on the roof of the number 1 turret, because if they're coming in the general direction at me, it works out a lot of the time that those shells, by the time they get there, although my time to target was a certain thing, that because a ship is moving toward me, that they're going to end up landing in the superstructure and not hitting the front guns. If you have in that same scenario, if you have a ship that's pointed right at you and you can't tell if it's moving forward or moving backward, and you already understand, in this ship that I'm playing right now, normally when a ship is moving at me better than 3/4 or full speed, if I aim at the front gun, it's going to hit the superstructure. But this ship right here that I'm shooting at, I can't tell what speed it's doing. I'm aiming at the front gun, and I'm hitting the front gun. That means it's either going really slow, if not stopped, ready to reverse, and you adjust your aim. You just raise your aiming reticle, and it's kind of a little bit counterintuitive because it looks like you're trying to shoot over the ship, but because you understand the gun performances or the gun arcs of the whatever ship you're in, that you're actually aiming toward the stern of the ship, the rear of the ship, and if it's coming to a stop or slowing down in preparation to move backward, by the time it starts moving backward, you already have rounds in the air that are going to meet it at its new location. The game doesn't tell us that. We have to either be told that, accidentally stumble across it, or watch a YouTube video. But those are basic gunnery skills. And I do wish there was something that was in game that was interactive that kind of taught those skills, but there's not yet. And I understand it. This is a free to play game at the end of the day. So there's a lot of things that aren't really that resources aren't spent on the fix. Some of you may argue the fact that those are important, but maybe they're not based on the revenue model that the game is built on. So we have to rely on people like myself or other YouTubers in general, because this topic is better covered visually with the videos showing, and there's some really good videos out there of it. iChase is one of probably the best ones that has a good set of videos. If you look him up on YouTube, that kind of goes over how you aim at ships. But the gunnery skills are very important. The other thing is with gunnery skills is proper ammo choice. Sometimes it's not the best time. Sometimes you need to know when to shoot, when to switch to high explosive, and when to switch back to AP. The general rule of thumb is if ships are giving you a fairly flat side of the ship to shoot at, that you use AP. But some ships don't have HE, so you need to understand where to aim at angled ships if you need to shoot an angled ship with AP only. Or what I consider a gunnery skill also is that we as players need to understand that I don't have to shoot at the closest ship. I don't have to shoot at the ship that's right in front of me, because if it's angled toward me, it's probably not the best target. I need to find a better target to shoot at that I can have more chances or more success of damaging. That, in my opinion, falls into gunnery skills, proper target selection. You don't want to be throwing rocks at a concrete wall. You want to be throwing rocks at a glass window. So proper target selection is baked into, in my opinion, gunnery skills. And it comes down, this game pretty much comes down to it comes down to RNG, but who has the better gunnery skills? Who understands where to shoot at targets? Who understands how to lead targets? Who understands how to wait for a ship to commit to a turn, see it in their head, or see it in your mind where that curve is at, and aim to where they're going to be. And that is a hard shot to pull off for a lot of people, because say a ship is turning away from you. Not only is its speed changing, but it's moving in a curved angle. It's slowly increasing its distance from you. And because we're looking at a two-dimensional screen, it's hard for some people, and it was for me in the beginning, to understand that not only do I have to move the target indicator, my target reticle, in the direction that they're moving, but I need to elevate it, which in actuality is shooting farther down that curve so my shells meet where the ship is going. And that's something else that's not shown in the game that we need to understand. But how do we practice that? Bots don't do that. Co-op, again, we're talking bots. The only way you're going to see those maneuvers and practice them is playing random battle. Well, I should say playing against real people, because you can play ranked and clan battles also, although clan battles tend to be static and ranked battles are fairly static too. That's the only way you're going to get good at it. And you have to take the shots. Take the shots as much as possible. Even if you feel you're not good at shooting at a particular range, or shooting at a ship that's making a particular maneuver, you have to take those shots. Keep the guns working. Keep cycling your guns. You want to get to the point where you're hitting 35 to 40% of your main battery shots. 20% sounds nice, especially when historical hit percentages were in the single digits in World of Warships. 30% is probably the bare minimum of where you need to be. And that's like just barely starting to be average, in my opinion. And actually, if you run a lot of math on how the size and the scope of the game is modified to fit the arcade style, and you take into account how powerful ships are, how fast they move, how big they are, the math will work out if you just ran it and figured out how powerful the guns actually are, or how many times I actually have to hit with a particular caliber gun to be effective based off of a loose historical reference. It's about 30% where you start being just average, and then from there on, it just gets better. But those are all basic gunnery skills. Until the game comes out with some kind of co-op or some kind of training room where maybe you can program the bots to do S curves. You can program the bots to increase and decrease the throttle. You can program the bots to try to angle their armor at you. We can only practice that versus real people. And a lot of us in the beginning, myself included, when I first started playing, would get frustrated with it. And it's a hard skill to practice live because a lot of the times you're just ineffective. I have one game way back in closed beta. No, I think it was right after closed beta. I had the Atlanta. It was part of a package that I had gotten. And I couldn't hit the broadside of the moon if I was leaning the Atlanta up against it. I just couldn't hit anything with that ship. And I remember a destroyer that YOLO rushed me, and I was just chain firing. I just held the mouse button down, left mouse button down, shoot, 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 shoot. And because I didn't understand how to aim and lead at a ship coming at me, I kept landing all my shots behind it. By the time I fixed it and I was able to start hitting the shots, the destroyer was already in range of me, torpedoes, and I was so wrapped up in trying to hit it with my main guns that I didn't even take the time or realize I needed a maneuver, and I was torpedoed nearly at point blank range in an Atlanta. Now, there's probably some of you going, what? That's terrible. You should never get torpedoed point blank range in an Atlanta. And you'd be right. And I was, because my gunnery skills were that bad. But I hadn't taken the time to properly practice those gunnery skills. And they're very important. High explosive ammunition can be a little bit of a crutch, although it has its places. But if you can perform with armor piercing ammunition and you build your gunnery skills based off of armor piercing ammunition, you're going to be that much better. The high explosive ammunition definitely has a place in the game. Definitely, there's times when you just need to use high explosive ammunition. And no, I'm not talking British battleships, because their armor piercing is very effective. More players should use armor piercing ammunition in British battleships. But that's a topic for another episode. But build those gunnery skills with AP to begin with. And don't be afraid to use the ships that have high arcing ballistic arcs like the US Navy. And you definitely play the ships that have the higher velocity guns like the Russians. But if you do those two, you're going to get all the ones in between. And the skill we need to build is to understand how that aiming reticle works in a game, understand what the mini map is telling us with the little circle, and understanding time to target. Those things we need to put together. Actually, you don't even need the mini map circle if you just understand the aiming reticle and time to target. If you understand how those two come together, your gunnery skills are going to improve vastly, and you'll just become that much more of a dangerous player. You'll become that much more lethal in the game. You'll be able to put ships down quicker because you'll be hitting more of your shots. And that is where you want to be. You want to be the player that you know that when it's one-on-one, all things are equal, same ship, same build. You want to know that, oh, my gunnery skills are superior to this person. I'm going to win that fight, regardless of what RNG tells me, because we can mitigate RNG a little bit by how we go about that engagement. And it comes back to gunnery skills. Even destroyers, even Japanese destroyers need to practice their gunnery skills. We hear it all the time. You know, it's almost like a meme. Oh, Japanese destroyers or torpedo boats don't use their guns. When in fact, the high tier Japanese destroyers, the torpedo boats, actually have pretty good guns when they're used at the right time and you can hit your shots. I'm not talking about the gun focused ones that just came out, because those are a whole nother story. I'm talking about the classic Japanese shimikaze is an example of they're not using their guns when their guns are actually effective when they're used properly by a player that has decent gunnery skills. So we need to build those gunnery skills. If you can't figure it out, ask somebody. You're going to find people that'll go into training rooms with you. You're going to find people to talk on various Discord channels who will definitely explain it to you. And if you run into a person that tells you to just get good, well, stop talking to that person. They're a waste of your time. If you get that comment back at you, move on to the next one. Ask somebody else. If you're in a clan, I'm sure there's somebody in your clan that'll probably take you aside and help you learn those gunnery skills. Wherever you can find the help, find it. Don't be afraid to seek it out. YouTube's a good spot to start if you don't really want, if you're more of the introvert type and don't really want to bother people, then go YouTube route initially. But sooner or later, you're going to get to the point where you just need some live one-on-one. If it doesn't start clicking for you right away, and then the next best thing is, hey, just get into random battles and keep those guns cycling. Keep shooting, keep shooting, keep shooting, keep shooting. The more rounds you put down range, the more visual feedback you get, the better you're going to be able to hone those gunnery skills. It's very important. And I don't think the gunnery skills are really looked at that importantly. I think some people kind of gloss over it a little bit. And it's more of just hit your target, just shoot center mass. And that comes from a lot of people who have done shooting in the military. We get that all the time. Hey, just shoot center mass, center mass, center mass. Well, in World of Warships, shooting center mass is not always the best choice. Sometimes you need to know when to shoot the bow, the stern, target specific locations of a ship. In the beginning, yeah, center mass. But after a while, you need to get to the point where you can target specific locations of a ship, especially when you're trying to start fires against those battleships that have fire prevention. You know that the superstructure turns into one fire location at that point. So you need to be able to hit the bow. You need to be able to hit the stern to start fires on the other two sections. That comes with gunnery skills and game mechanics knowledge in the game. So my advice to all of you, or those of you who maybe still have trouble with hitting targets, is to just go out there and seek out that help, whoever it is. And if you're an introvert or you don't really feel like bugging people, every chance you get when you're in game, just get those guns, use those guns, cycle those guns. See a target moving away from you, shoot at it anyway. Just shoot at it, shoot at it, shoot at it. And you never know, it might start clicking. It did with me after a while, finally figured it out. There's still some ships that just drive me nuts, but in general, I finally figured it out. And it just came from practice. So it's like any other skill that you try to build, even if you go out and shoot for real. Some of those lessons can transfer over into the game. Some of them aren't, because they're just some things that you just have to worry about or just don't happen in the game. But some lessons do. Sight alignment, sight picture. Try to have a similar sight picture for a similar look of a ship. Build those sight pictures in your mind so you know that. You'd be surprised at how good your memory is. Once you remember how you're hitting a ship at a certain angle, certain speed, later on when you come back to it, it's just gonna feel wrong and you'll be able to fix it. So gunnery skills, basic gunnery skills are very important. Go out and practice them as much as possible. Try and don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to get yourself into a bad situation sometime. And honestly, sometimes that works too. You have to shoot your way out of a problem. You better start shooting better. And sometimes that can help you too. Sometimes that can be a learning tool. But whatever way it is, don't get frustrated with it, because it's a skill that everybody can learn. We can all hone it. We can all learn it. We can all become better at it, because all the information is built into the game that we need. It's right in front of you. We just need to learn how to process it properly. But like I always say, if it's too much thinking and it's stressing you out, hey, the game is for entertainment. Don't turn it into a job. If trying to figure this stuff out is getting too much or it's causing you too much stress, or maybe it's making the game unfun, forget about it. Go do something else and come back to it later. Don't turn World of Warships into a job. It's a video game and it's meant for entertainment. Have all the fun with it you can. Play the game whatever way that at the end of the day you have the most fun doing. And trust me, the gunnery skills are going to still come to you anyway the more you use those guns. So go out and have fun. Come and join the World of Warships North American Community Discord server. The Discord server is created for the North American community to come together and help each other grow as a community and hopefully become better players. You can find a link to the North American Discord server in the show notes and at the top of the main page of the Warship Tactics website. A few final thoughts. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. Not actually. I'm just talking tier 8 matchmaking. In my opinion, a good portion of the player base is completely convinced that tier 8 matchmaking is nearly unplayable. I disagree. Tier 8, in my opinion, is the best tier to hone the skills necessary to become a great player. Think about that. When you have to overcome the shortcomings of a tier 8 ship, well, most of the tier 8 ships fighting tier 9 and tier 10 ships, if you can become successful in those situations more times than not and become lethal in those situations, you're going to become a better player. Take advantage of that. Also, tier 8 ships shooting up tier 9 and tier 10 ships, or I should say, any tier ship shooting ships that are a higher tier than it is going to earn more experience and credits based off of less percentage of work. If you don't believe me, you can go look this up. Go to the wiki, go to any information is lower tier ships make better credits and experience shooting higher tier ships. Tier 8 matchmaking, in my opinion, is not broke. It's fine. You just needed, not you, but we need to understand how to overcome it. If you can figure out the tactical maneuvers that you need to make to overcome fighting a tier 8 versus a tier 9 or 10 ship, and you figure it out, you're going to be that much more lethal in the rest of the matchmaking. Actually, tier 5 is probably the one that drives me nuts the most. But even then, I relish being bottom tier when I play World of Warships. It's that much more fun to me. Come and watch my World of Warships live streams on Facebook at Maddminister Gaming. The link will be in the show notes. Thanks for those of you who stopped by and support the page. I'm going to go ahead and say it now that Tuesday, 5 p.m. Pacific, which is midnight UTC Universal Time, is going to be the schedule for the live stream from here until I change it. I'm going to try that. So Tuesdays, 5 p.m. Pacific, midnight UTC. Last thing, torpedoes in the water are nobody's friend unless they're deep water torpedoes. In that case, destroyers, you're safe. I'm your host, Maddminister, and you've been listening to the Warship Tactics Podcast, where I try to help you improve your World of Warships gameplay. Visit warshiptactics.com for new episodes on Mondays. Thank you for listening.